Greetings, everyone. My name is Emily Louie, and on behalf of Campbell Company, I would like to welcome you to Navigating Fundraising, Communications, and Hiring During the COVID-19 Pandemic. We want to thank AFP Maryland, our webinar co-host, and all of you for joining us. We hope we can provide some relief during this difficult time. Before we begin today's presentation, I'd like to quickly go through some logistics for those of you who may be new to our webinars. First, please close any programs other than GoToWebinar that are running on your computer. Next, we recommend calling in with a telephone instead of using your computer speakers. And if you do experience any visual issues, please send a chat to Campbell Company or contact GoToWebinar at the number on your screen. Today's webinar is being recorded and will last 60 minutes. Within the next 24 hours, you will receive an email from GoToWebinar that includes information on how to access this recording. We do welcome questions throughout the webinar, so please use the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel that should be on the right side of your computer screen. We will also hold time at the end of the webinar for Q&A. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our presenters today, Andy Brommel, Director of Communications Consulting, Chris McFeely, Director of Executive Search, and Christina Yoon, Vice President and East Region Director.
All right, thanks everyone. I'm Andy Brommel. I'm Director of Communications Consulting with Campbell Company. We have a communications team that focuses mostly on case development and fundraising communications with a lot of campaign work and campaign branding and materials and case development. So kind of the perspective that I'll be speaking from, sharing some of the insights from our communications team.
And I'm Chris McFeely. I'm the Director of Executive Search here at Campbell Company. I've been with the firm for just over 19 years. And in addition to conducting searches for CEOs, executive directors, and many development professionals, we also do the internal hiring for Campbell Company. And so today I'll be sharing with you some of what we're hearing from our clients and also a little bit about what our firm is doing to help our team members during this time.
Great. Thanks, Chris and Andy. This is Tina Yoon, and I'm based outside of the Washington, D.C. area in Northern Virginia. And I work with clients in all sectors that are located up and down the East Coast. A large concentration
mentioned
of them.
Both Chris and I are based out of the Chicago office, which is a underappreciated part of Maryland.
Yeah, and actually a large concentration of the clients that I happen to work with are located in the Mid-Atlantic. So it's really great to be with all of you here today. I've been engaged in deep discussions with clients and with other organizations over the past few weeks on how to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic and how to move forward in these unprecedented times. We're all pleased to have this opportunity to speak with you today. We don't profess to have all the answers, but we do want to share with you some of what we've been hearing, experiencing alongside our clients, and what we've been recommending. And so hopefully this will be helpful to you in the coming weeks. On the next slide, you can see what our agenda is for today. I'd just like to do a quick overview. We'll first share with you some learnings from other challenging times during Campbell Company's 40-plus year history. And we'll quickly review what we're hearing from across the nonprofit sector and share some strategies with you and how to navigate the new normal. And the way we're going to organize this time is that Andy and I will first talk a little bit about fundraising communications together. And then we'll pass it off to Chris, who will talk about issues related to hiring and even looking for a job in this time and how you might navigate that. But actually, the bulk of our time will be spent on the third section, the audience Q&A. And we'd actually love to hear from you in the audience. If you have any stories that you can share about how you're responding, what you've seen is working well, what you're hearing from your donors, in addition to any questions that you might have that we as the panelists will be able to respond to. So let's get started. On the next slide, you'll see some learnings that we have from other challenging times in our nation's history. So this is referring back to the dot-com crash in the mid-90s, looking at 9/11 that happened in 2001, and also the Great Recession from 2007 to 2008 and beyond. And here's what we know. So first, donors will not stop giving, but they will narrow the number of organizations that they give to, generally focusing on their top 2 or 3. And this underscores the importance of donor retention and stewardship, and how important it is for organizations to strive to become a donor's top philanthropic priority. We also saw that donors will take longer to make decisions about significant gifts, especially those backed by accumulated wealth in the market. And kind of related to that is what we saw happening in campaigns. So in particular, when we look back at our history and working on campaigns with our clients during the Great Recession, we saw that almost all of them we were working on during that time actually met or exceeded their goals, and that's about 95% of them. And so that's really good news. We did note that some of the campaign timelines were delayed a little bit by about 6 to 12 months. And the ones that actually did fail, that relatively small percentage, it was likely due to the fact that they already had some fundamental issues that were at play and not necessarily could be pegged on the recession itself. And so that actually gives us some hope for what we might be encountering in the next several months. We do note that what we're experiencing today just really was like a much sharper, more precipitous drop in the stock market response and what we're experiencing in unemployment and the ways that nonprofits have responded. So we can't like totally rely on that, but I think it serves as some guide. And finally, organizations that stay in close touch with their donors, and especially the mid-level and major donors, are the ones that will fare much better than those who do not. And what we know is that if you aren't keeping in touch with your donors, someone else is. They'll fill up that vacuum and occupy that space. And so, donor retention really is arguably the single most important strategy for you to keep in mind for long-term fundraising success. And we recommend you think about where you'd like to be at the other end of this pandemic when we emerge, and what kind of an organization are you going to be, and to keep that in mind. And we know that communication is a key part of this strategy. So on the next slide, we're going to start off by taking a look at, from the point of view of fundraising and communications, what we're hearing from the nonprofit sector today. So this is real-time information. So first of all, people do understand the unique role that nonprofits play in this response. And we know that nonprofits already fill a gap that can't be met by the government. And but now the gaps have actually widened, and nonprofits are stepping in. We actually have new research that shows that young Americans between the ages of 18 and 30 really trust nonprofits much more than the government and corporations and social movements to actually do what's right in times like these in a pandemic. And this is information from causeandsocialinfluence.com. We also know that organizations on the front lines of the COVID response are seeing surges in responses to their fundraising requests. And this is true of groups like food banks, social services, social service agencies, and others. And plus, what we're seeing is that organizations are finding new ways to show how, looking at new ways at how the pandemic can shine a light on their mission, and it might be in sort of an unexpected way. For example, I actually personally have found myself turning to the Metropolitan Opera every single night. They're based in New York, and I've only been to them once, and I really had no relationship with them, but I heard that they were offering free access to their recorded operas from years past, and they released a new one every night. And for me personally, during a stressful time like this, it has been really grateful to organizations like these, as well as those serving those that are hardest hit by the pandemic. And speaking of arts and culture, this is a sector that probably saw the impact of this really, they were hit really hard and earlier than others perhaps. They serve as gathering places and are reliant on visitors and patrons, and many don't have large reserves to cushion the blow. And so a lot of staff are being laid off in organizations such as these. We're seeing in general that nonprofits are being hit pretty hard, maybe even to the same level as restaurants and retail. And those that actually may not be laying off large numbers of staff are still affected and are looking at ways that they can trim non-essential services and activities, trim their budgets, trying to, undergo some belt tightening. And we have seen examples, though, of some donors stepping in to help save the institution that they know and love so well and really want to see survive this period of time. You know, they can't imagine a world without an organization such as this, and so they're really stepping up. And, you know, we're hearing about some prominent philanthropists in the country, you know, offering tens of millions of dollars in response to COVID-19, and I think we'll be seeing more of that in the days to come. And finally, some organizations, just one last point. Some organizations that were not set up for virtual engagement, where most of their employees just came to the office, conducted their work, we're actually seeing that some of them, you know, they've really been forced to deal with the fact that we have a stay-at-home order. We need to adjust to the new normal now. You may have heard that Virginia's governor has announced yesterday, we're being ordered to stay home until June 10th. I know Maryland, D.C., no end date at that point, but, you know, even the Virginia schools are being forced to stay shut through the end of the school year. And, you know, many other states are likely to extend their timelines. So this is the new normal, and I'd like to pass it to Andy to talk through some other points here.
So this, it's been interesting to see that some organizations feel all of a sudden very hesitant or unsure about asking because they don't want to seem tone deaf, or they're not sure if it's their moment to ask. And at the same time, other organizations are moving forward, are plainly stating their need for continued support. You know, they're asking for the support they need in these uncertain times. So I think a lot of organizations feel a little uncertain about whether and how and when to ask, and they're reflecting that to us. At the same time, as we all know, events are being canceled or shifted to virtual formats. You know, if you have an event in the near future that's probably already canceled, that's one thing. You're obviously forced to adapt. If you have an event scheduled in the fall that's significant, you know, you might be worried about competition as other things get rescheduled to that time frame. And if you have an event scheduled, significant events in the summer, that's where you're kind of stuck because you don't know how long we'll have sheltering and distancing measures in place. You don't know when things are going to be happening again on that scale, and you may have investment decisions and spending decisions coming up around those summer events that you're unsure of how to handle. So that each one of these situations, wherever your events are, there's something tricky about it. This last point, we see organizations obviously are leaning into digital communications and finding creative new ways to meet people where they are. If you look at larger scale communications initiatives, branding projects, case development, campaign communications projects, many of those are still moving forward. Many of them are having their timelines extended a bit, but we're seeing a lot of organizations that know they need to do a significant project around their branding or case for support or a campaign. And that is, that's not changed by COVID-19, but the timeline is affected. So, organizations are navigating that. And so far, we're seeing more delays and pauses versus, putting a full stop on projects that we know are of strategic significance to the future of the organization.
So if we look at the next slide, what are some strategies we can employ to navigate and leverage this new normal? We have some ideas that are outlined here that are specifically around fundraising, and I'll pass it to Andy in a minute to talk about communication strategies as well. So one overarching comment would be that we are seeing this as a gift of time, and it provides you with an opportunity to create a more resilient organization and get ready for what's ahead on the other side of the curve. You should think about how you want to emerge from this crisis with a team, infrastructure, systems, leaders, and donors that are ready to hit the ground running. So under donor engagement, we see that this is your chance to have a personal communication with everyone in your portfolio. People are more available, they're not moving around as much. And you really shouldn't assume that they are not ready to engage or interested in engaging. So the first thing you can ask them is, how are you doing? And then once you hear how they're doing, that'll give you insight as to whether or not they're ready to engage as a donor. But they will likely turn the question over to you and say, how's it going with the organization? What are you doing to respond? And that's your perfect opportunity to share about the impact on your organization. You can provide your donors with human-to-human connection during this time that people are craving that during this time of social distancing. You have opportunities to consider a challenge or a match during this time in which maybe one of your closest donors can step forward with an opportunity to inspire others to give. In one case I can think of, one of our former clients, they put forth a challenge for one of their board members for $1 million. Every gift to the organization during this time would be matched up to $1 million, and that was really remarkable and exciting to hear about. There are new funding opportunities that have emerged. I'm sure you're aware of some of the local community foundations are providing support for capacity building and just core operations. There are other opportunities with the government as well, and there are likely to be people that are interested. How is this impacting our constituents, and what can I do to help? And finally, prospect research is your chance to dig into that prospect research that you normally don't have time to do, and maybe think about that strategy that you can use to approach some of your donors a little bit further down the line. Under the area of leadership, we also see this as an opportunity to engage leadership in deeper prospect strategy discussions and to think about peer screening, network mapping. They can also help you with your outreach and conversations with donors and prospects, and it's a way that they can provide tangible help to supplement your current capacity. And finally, you can train them on new messaging. There are new things that are happening and the ways in which your organizations are responding. And so using this as an opportunity to train them on what the new messages are and how they can share what's going on with your organization to others that also care. And finally, in the area of staffing and systems, this is really taking a look internally. Your chance, it's like cleaning out your closet, you have a chance to clean up your database. It's something you know you have to do. This is your chance to do it. Or even thinking about what kinds of database reports do we really need that we just are struggling with because we never had time to actually create them and work on them and refine them. So chance to do that. Take a look at your policies and procedures, new ways of working, documenting these ways of working. And maybe you even realize, wow, we only have like 2 people on staff who know how to do X, Y, or Z. Let's try to cross-train and get others on board with really being able to create redundancies so that we can create a much stronger organization coming out at the other end of this. Pass it off to Andy now.
I love all those suggestions, especially the idea that there's, this is obviously a terrible situation to navigate, and if there's anything in it that's an opportunity, it's that having some of your time open, or being sort of shaken up and looking at how you're using your time, because there are so many, whether it's in fundraising or communications, so many ways in which the things that are most time consuming in our jobs and in our work are not always the highest value things. And if we're not getting consumed by all the time that goes into event planning and coordination, but you have some time to actually talk to your highest value donors, there's something to learn from that and possibly something to gain. So on the communication strategies, this first one's really the most important, and this is kind of the big picture. How do we talk in this moment? What is natural and appropriate for communicating our message when we know everyone's got so much else on their minds? The guidance here is to connect the moment to your mission and message. I want you to kind of imagine like a spectrum of how much you could adapt or change your messaging based on this crisis. And on the one end is just completely abandoning all of your messaging plans and just doing crisis response stuff around COVID-19 and just moving entirely toward that and just giving, these kinds of emails we've all been getting over the last 2 weeks from every organization saying, here's how this is affecting us. Here's, just immediate, simple response. Then on the other end of the spectrum is like you change nothing, or you just do the kind of, I think of this as like now more than everism, where you just kind of say whatever you were going to say anyway, but it's now more than ever. This is important. Okay, so don't be now more than ever guy who like doesn't change at all what you're going to say, but you don't have to completely abandon and only talk about, in a crisis response mode. You want to look for things that synthesize these ways to talk about how COVID-19, the changing circumstances in your community and around your mission, speak authentically and directly to this new reality and connect it back to your larger message and mission. Look for the ways in which this moment shines a light on the importance of your mission. Look for the ways that your mission adapts and responds to these changing circumstances. Look for that synthesis of what you were, your sort of your long-term messaging and this very immediate situation. So the second bullet here is to keep it simple. Just remember, everyone is so taxed right now, mentally, emotionally, logistically. If you're trying to, homeschool your kids while doing your full-time job and just managing your, checking in on all your friends and family, no one has time. No one has brain space right now. This is not a time for high concept, complicated communications. Be very direct. Share how this is affecting your organization, what you need, what you're doing, what you're asking for. Be very simple and direct, because people don't have much brain space right now. And that the upside of that is that they might make some of the moment giving decisions that happen pretty quickly. I've given to things over the last few weeks that I don't even remember making the gift. It's just I got a message at the right time when I was, feeling receptive or responsive, and I gave to something. Third point, this is an okay time to ask for what you need. We should feel comfortable about this. Any other day of the year, we might have given you the guidance that, your case for support and messaging should not be around what you need, because people don't give to needs, they give to good causes, they give to things that they feel are sort of a winning effort, they give to strength, not need. That's all true in general, but I think right now, especially with your loyal and established supporters, you can ask for what you need. It doesn't make you sound like a loser. This is a time to do that. People want to know and have the sense that for something they care about, there's something they can do to help. Give people a way to stay connected from home. Find ways to show people your mission and how it's adapting. So this can be, simple features or profiles or stories that just show, what does your mission look like in the time of social distancing? How do you deliver your programs under these circumstances? Show people what you're doing a little bit under the hood and behind the scenes so that they can still feel like they understand your mission and they're connected to it. Share positive news if it's appropriate. You don't want to be tone deaf there, but if there are things you can shine a light on around the resilience of your organization or your community, creative ways that you're responding, even just highlighting the ways that donors in your community are responding. Anything positive we could all use a little bit more of right now. But don't be tone deaf. And the main thing here is look at anything you had already sort of automatically scheduled to send out, any social media posts or mailings or stuff that you planned a month ago that's scheduled to go out. Let's go take another look at all those things before they go out and completely strike a wrong note. It doesn't mean you need to abandon them. You might need to update them. It might mean even just like putting a little insert in with your annual report that was already going to be going out, or that just says, hey, this is, just meeting donors where they are, understanding that they have these questions and concerns that you need to kind of speak to before they can receive your larger message. Second to last point, continue to work on your case. You're going to need it on the other side of this and through this. So if you had a need to work on your case for support and messaging before this, that's just as important now. And if you have some time available, this could be a good time to start working on your messaging so that it's there for you as you ramp back up. And finally, digital engagement, obviously very important right now. So if you don't have a well-developed digital strategy, this would be a good time to focus some time on that. So those are my points. Let's pass off to Chris.
Thanks, Andy, and thank you, Tina. A lot of what's interesting is some of the points covered both for the fundraising and communications actually apply to hiring and search in a lot of ways, mostly because it's all relational, building out relationships and working with people, which is critical to every organization's success. And right now, what we're hearing from the sector not only from our clients, but also through different groups of search consultants that we're a part of is, of course, leadership is key. And that doesn't mean just the CEOs or just the vice presidents and the, C-suite. Every single employee has an opportunity right now to really show some incredible leadership in whatever way that they can. And so encouraging staff to think, through this disruption, how does this change the way we work, really provides people with a unique challenge and something that they really can solve in the short term. And being a leader who is also empathetic to how hard this is on folks, and everybody's hit a little bit differently throughout this new normal, which is not normal at this point. I mean, we don't even know how to truly define it. But the talent on your team is, and I know, Andy, I am saying it's more important than ever before, because I really do think at this time it really is. And so taking care of our people will help our organizations all be so much stronger. And whether it's our donors or our team members, it's really critical. We are seeing some organizations who have moved to sort of essential employees, but in the big picture, we haven't heard a lot of layoffs happening at this point. And so people are just still trying to learn how to work remotely and still accomplish the goals and their strategic goals that they need to while remote. In fact, we're seeing some hiring continue, especially at the senior level, executive directors and CEOs. Certainly, there have been a few clients have had organizations, a few organizations have had CEOs who were preparing to retire, who have had to change their plans. And we saw this in the previous recession in 2008, where people stayed on and they wanted to make sure that their organization was left in a really strong place before turning it over to a new leader. And so we are seeing that from time to time. So let's talk a little bit about strategies for navigating this new normal for the next slide. And really what you're seeing right now is a taste of that. Everything is obviously being done virtually. So video as often as possible. And this also, I believe, ties in with the leadership piece. I've been trying personally to check in with my team at least once a day. I'm choosing a team member, whether they like it or not, to just reach out to and sort of have a water cooler chat, whether it's by phone or by video, just so that we can have some FaceTime together. I miss seeing people at work. And so I think, that connection is still important to maintain. And until we're allowed to, be together again, we'll have to find new ways to do that. And really, stepping up and seizing the moment, like I had mentioned before, embracing the opportunity to do some new things, to be creative, to be a little risky and trying something new, I think is an opportune time for people to really demonstrate good leadership throughout this situation that we're in. For those folks who are thinking about or who are involved in a search, and we'll talk a little bit about both from the candidate and the hiring side, employer side, if you're in a search, I would suggest that you can continue to explore that opportunity. Organizations still are hiring. Most folks on this call are probably in fundraising and development, and so those positions are necessary. And you have to really think about, when we come out on the other side of this, like Tina mentioned at the beginning, what kind of strong team do we need? And so organizations are continuing to move through the hiring process. And as a candidate, I would just encourage you to ask lots of questions, do your homework on the organization, follow on social media, a lot of the things that you would normally do, but I think you will find that organizations are so much more engaged that way that you'll learn a lot about the culture of a potential employer through those different means too, as well as asking a lot of questions. And along the same lines, all interviews we're hearing are being completed by video. And I think the challenge there can be not going into an office, not seeing the building, not seeing the site. And so coming up with creative questions, ways to find out what the culture is like when you can't actually immerse yourself in it is a new challenge. And, I would encourage both folks who are conducting the interviews and those interviewees to really, ask not just your standard interview questions, but get to know people, build that rapport, talk about not just how you're doing at the highest level, but really share, and don't overshare. It doesn't have to be an interview, doesn't want to turn into sort of a therapy type session, but getting to know people at a time like this is pretty, I think, easy to do because people have a hunger to engage. And so that trust and transparency comes through in a video. Not as great as in person, but prior to this, we've conducted entire searches where we've never met the client in person or any of the candidates. And you can take a little extra, work to get it done, but you can really learn to understand an organization when everyone is committed to that level of transparency. If you do have to onboard a new employee, so say you've hired someone and you need to do that, obviously being as flexible as possible as someone is learning a new job alone in their house when they can't be around other colleagues. It's going to take a lot of empathy, a lot of flexibility, and a lot of communication. And so sharing as much documentation as you can along the way, planning for regular conversations and check-in calls is critical. And also really having a plan laid out for your new employee so that it's easier for them to follow along, I think will help until we can find a time where we can all be back together in an organization at the office. And then for those of you in a leadership role and even in any kind of manager coordinator role, if you don't have an emergency sort of succession plan, I strongly suggest thinking about one, even if it's just a one-page bulleted list of what happens. Imagine if you weren't at the office anymore, who would do the things that you do that no one knows you really do? It's just those things that magically happen that make everything run smoothly. Write them down. I've been thinking a lot about that, and hopefully none of us will get sick or have to take time off to care for family, but you may need to, and it would go much better if you just have it that you can pass it off to someone. And so even if it's in a sort of selfish sort of way, thinking about how to manage if you're not there, you can prepare something like that. And it'll really help strengthen your team and your organization.
Great, thank you so much. So now we'll be taking some audience questions. So please send them in through the questions box in the GoToWebinar control panel. As Tina mentioned, we also invite you to share your experiences and how your organization has been responding to COVID-19. So please send those in too. So let's get started. Before we start with questions, I do want to share a comment sent in by Stacy, who said, "My university just announced a hiring freeze. However, I have noticed a lot of recruiting activity from recruiters, which is a positive sign. Some nonprofits are seeing this as a good time to focus on hiring. I'm also going through my portfolio in alphabetical order, sending check-in emails and offering calls or Zoom conference calls. Most people aren't taking me up on this offer, but I'm grateful that my university is changing the way they are measuring metrics, giving credit for calls and Zoom calls as visits. I hope this continues moving forward, as many of my donors in the tech sector prefer electronic means of communication, which doesn't count in our metrics."
Well, one thing I'll say, if I could just make one comment about that, it's really interesting to hear about how you're getting the credit for those Zoom calls. We are finding that a lot of our clients are these days having conversations with donors by Zoom, by video. And one of our clients even did a $5 million ask, and they got a bigger gift than that because the donor was ready to be asked, and so it didn't come too soon, and they were ready to be engaged by video, and they were responding to the fact that we have unusual circumstances now. The donor was really compelled to make a bigger gift to respond to the current situation. And so I'm really excited to hear that you're able to interact with your donors in that way. And I think, as these dates get pushed out for when we can go back to interacting with one another face to face, at least here in Virginia, this is a long road ahead. And so we just have to accept, okay, we just have to now pivot and adjust and figure out a new way to keep the work going, because what we're doing is so important. And so I think donors are, will also be responding in that way. So it's very exciting to hear.
Yeah, it sounds to me like Stacy's killing it. So good work. I mean, those are great things to be doing. And I wonder if, this will change. We're just going to snap back to the status quo after this, and maybe things like what kinds of contacts count or what kinds of communications are privileged. Maybe that gets reconsidered. I bet in particular, if you were able to close a couple decent gifts through a video call, as Tina mentioned, that might make a good case for counting those in your metrics as well if they can actually yield gifts. But yeah, that's interesting. That could be one of those things that was maybe ready to change but needs this kind of event to change it.
Great, thanks so much. Our next question is, my institution is embarking on a capital campaign to raise funds for renovation of a physical space on campus. Is it appropriate to move forward with funders during this time, and how do we do that and be sensitive to the current environment?
So it sounds to me like this individual, the organization already has its plans set for what the campaign will be about. Because what I was going to say is that if you happen to be in a campaign planning period, I think there's still a lot of great work that can be done to focus on internally. How are you positioned to be able to manage campaign fundraising? And so to do that internal assessment is something that's really easily done at this point in time. Working on analytics to take a look at who your potential donors might be based on capacity is another piece of work that could be done, which is a great piece of work to be done now. And then also working on your case for support. So in the case for this individual who has the question, it sounds like you are ready to engage with donors, and I would simply be starting to reach out to the ones that you're closest to and to start off with, how are you doing in this time? And is this an okay time for me to be able to share with you our exciting plans? We still feel like what we want to accomplish is urgent. It's a renovation. The space is needed. It will result in us being able to deliver on our mission a lot better, and for these reasons. And so to be kind of like feeling out the potential donor and having them let you know, is this okay for us to continue this conversation? They may come back and say that this isn't a good time. They're dealing with X, Y, or Z. Please come back in 6 months. And that's actually very helpful information rather than just you sitting and wondering what is going on and should I even reach out. I think it's okay to reach out and start that conversation.
That's interesting. Yeah, and this is an area where if you're in the quiet phase of a campaign, the sort of quietness of that gives you a lot of room to work. I could see how you might feel uncomfortable publicly launching a campaign for a building project tomorrow, and maybe the public phase of this might get pushed off if that's what you were approaching. But to Tina's point, there's no reason that you couldn't continue to have those conversations and be open to the fact that your donors may not be able to think about this if they have other COVID-related things, that are taking precedence for them philanthropically, or they're just not in a place, or they're concerned about they're not feeling financially confident to make the gift that they are probably capable of. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that might get in the way, but they also might love to just focus on something positive and talk about this exciting building project and get absorbed in the renderings and the details and the whole, all the sort of imagination that comes around a capital project that gets donors excited. So yeah, I think it's like a cautious green light, proceed sort of one by one with your donors, see where they're at. And understand the timeline might get extended. The public announcement in particular might get extended, but you might find that there are people who are still ready to talk to you about it.
Great, thank you so much. Chris, this one is for you. Could you please elaborate on accepting a job in this environment? Would there be any risk between giving notice and starting officially at the new job?
So it's a great question, and we've had conversations with organizations who are hiring right now, and they're still moving forward. I don't think there's more risk right now if you ask all of the right questions and you find out what is the health of the organization, what is their plan through this COVID crisis, so that you can rest assured that you won't take a job and then in 2 or 3 or 6 months they'll have to make cuts. It really depends too on sort of the level of the position. Some positions are probably a lot more essential than others, but I would just ask a lot of questions about what their planning is as they move forward through this crisis and what that looks like historically for them when they've come up through some significant challenges in the organization.
Great, thank you, Chris. We are getting quite a few questions about, Andy, what you mentioned about being tone deaf, and if you could elaborate more on this. Ben asked, our board has recently approved personnel changes that have been in the works for several months, namely a promotion and a part-time hire. While long-term funding is in flux, especially if we have to cancel events through the summer, I'm cautious about communicating those changes to our core audience. It does strike me as tone deaf. Thoughts?
Interesting. So the scenario is announcing promotions and a part-time hire at a time when there's concern around the financial picture with events. So this is one of those situations where it's obviously situation specific. I'll tell you the questions that I would ask if this were a client presenting me with this situation. The first thing I would want to know is why do we announce promotions and hires? What is the benefit that we're hoping to gain from that? What would be lost if we sort of pushed that off or deferred it? Because if it's not that important, then maybe you don't need to take the risk. If the promotions and the hires are part of an exciting, you've hired in some new artistic director or something, it's actually part of an exciting story about the future of organization. Maybe that's a positive thing that weighs in the balance against the risk. This is another area. The next question I would think about is, could you test this on a few of your board members? I love using board members as they're like the membrane between your staff and then your outside audience. They kind of span both worlds. So they're a great test audience for how do we think the outside community would view this or respond to this messaging. So this might be a place to take their temperature on it. They may appreciate being consulted and asked. And it may be also a thing where if you do make this announcement, it's all about how you do it. It's about how it's couched. It's about saying it's part of a comprehensive communication where you're saying, hey, audience, here's where we are. Here's what's going on. Here are speaking to your immediate concerns, how COVID is affecting us, the measures we're taking. But even as we take these immediate measures, we're also not losing our focus on our long-term mission and health and future. And so even as we do X, Y, and Z and prepare for A, B, and C, we're also moving forward with these key things for these reasons. And it's, if it's part of a more comprehensive communication, and that might mean doing it fairly differently than how you would have done it 2 months ago, it could still kind of work and make sense. How does that strike you from like a fundraiser's perspective and thinking about the donor audience?
Yeah, I agree with you, Andy. There are a lot of questions that it raises, but I do think, sometimes board members feel like, oh, I'm still too much on the inside, but you can even test it out with maybe 1 or 2 of your donors that you have a good relationship with, and it could be a nice way to engage them, make them feel like an insider, and make them feel like they're really helping you out in this time of need. So I really like that idea.
Thanks so much. Our next question is, our national organization is in pretty good shape, but our affiliates in states, which are primarily volunteer organizations, are struggling. How can we best help them now? Information and outreach is one action we plan, but are there other things we should be thinking about?
So
I guess, should I jump in first, Andy?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I might think about here is, you know, I think there is a communication side of things, and you know, maybe Andy could speak to that a little bit more in terms of what is the message that you can equip them all with to be able to share with their constituents, with their volunteers, so that everybody understands what the situation that we're in today. So that would be one thing. Another is if you can provide guidance to them to help them think about what are some of the key things we need to be doing now with the donors that we have that are closest to us, and be helping them know, like maybe giving them like a checklist of some of the key activities that they could focus on in this time, and to provide some resources for them as well to be able to rely on. I think that those might be important things. And, you know, you can go back to what we shared earlier in the webinar about some of the things that they could be working on to engage their volunteers. You know, it was under the leadership section about how they can be helping, like engaging the volunteers and helping them through this time, I think is another important piece to consider.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking on the same lines. I keep going back to the fact that nobody has any brain right now. You know, we're all a little scattered and just pulled in many directions and just depleted. And if I'm a volunteer in one of your local affiliates, if I've got the scenario right, the national organization is staff driven, the local affiliates are more volunteer driven. If I'm on the ground in a local volunteer driven affiliate, I don't know how much time and space I have to think about this organization right now, and I feel my lack of expertise in responding to the situation as a volunteer. So maybe if the national this might be a time where people look to the national organization for leadership. If you can push out very simple talking points, templates for, here's how, if all the local affiliates need to raise money for general operating just to get through the next quarter or whatever, could we push out a template to them that says, just plug in your details here and use this. Give them a little bit more guidance, ask less of them. And it might mean slightly changing how the organization usually works if usually it's more the initiative comes from them. And you might even think about engaging a few, take the executive directors or the leadership of your 3 or 4 strongest chapters or a balanced set of chapters, and have them brainstorm with you about creating a template or a set of talking points or some generalized tools that you could push out to everyone. That might be a way to do it as well. But yeah, I'm just thinking about the folks who are in those positions who feel a little bit paralyzed by the situation and might appreciate really having it kind of put in their hands to implement.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, our organization raises funds through traditional events and direct solicitation. Our audience has not shown itself to be conducive to virtual fundraising. What would you suggest to do in lieu of events, and do you have any thoughts on types of virtual fundraising that could be effective?
Emily, could you say that one again? There were a lot of specifics in there I wanted to make sure I captured.
Oh, well, basically, we're getting a lot of questions about virtual fundraising now that in-person events have been canceled. So our audience is wondering what you suggest doing in place of those events, and if you have any suggestions on types of virtual fundraising that could be effective.
So one thing that I think of when I think about an event, and this would apply to virtual or in person, is, you have to think about what is the purpose of having the event. Is it one where you want to be able to share about your mission and stories of impact that basically are a way to bring new people into the fold and have them be interested in engaging further with your organization? So the idea of like a friend raiser. Or do you have an event whose main purpose is actually to raise money So if you kind of like separate that out and think about what is the main driving purpose behind this event. Are we trying to raise friends or are we trying to raise money? And of course, each of them can do some of both, right? But you do want to have a clear sense of what is that driving purpose. And then once you have that, and I think when you want to think about maybe doing it virtually, what are the elements that you keep in place and adapt to a virtual environment that will help you with one or the other? So if you are really looking to highlight the mission and stories of impact, that I would think about ways that you can collect those stories as first-person video testimonials about the impact that your organization had on you as an individual and share that with the community. If you can collect those kinds of stories and feature them, then you will have, in essence, try to be able to accomplish that same goal. If you are actually thinking, well, this is really our chance to raise money, and we typically do it through having different people purchase tables, and they bring their friends, but we are guaranteed this, $1,000 a table, whatever it is, then you want to try to see if you can recreate that kind of environment in a virtual event. So there are examples online where other groups, different groups have created that still purchase a table at the $1,000 and invite your friends to participate and contribute as well. You can still recreate those kinds of activities even though it's virtual. And then the other sort of tricky part of your question was, what if my folks that normally participate don't want virtual engagement? Then I think that you have to figure out ways to speak to them directly and, in a way that is specific for what they would respond to. And maybe it's not like a virtual moment that everyone logs in at the same time, but maybe it's instead more personalized communication that's just specific to that particular donor. And you just have to kind of know for each one how they best respond. And if it is a matter of one-on-one outreach, then I think you're going to have to do it. Like bite the bullet and do it. And maybe the virtual is not the best way. However, I will say that, this really isn't an example of raising money through this, but I know that, Seattle was hit pretty hard earlier than the rest of the country. And the Seattle Symphony actually went through and decided to put on have a performance that was available online, and people engaged with it virtually. And it was like thousands more than typically engage with any concert on a given night from the Seattle Symphony. And people were so uplifted by that, engaged with the symphony in a whole new way, maybe rediscovered the symphony. Maybe they've been living in Seattle for years, never been to a concert, but then this time they decided to log on. So I will say that there can be some surprises along the way too with your virtual engagement, that maybe some people are more willing to try something new or engage with a new organization in a way they never have before. So it does give you an opportunity to maybe even bring in some new support.
Yeah, I love, Tina, I love your idea of almost like deconstructing the event. Like, what is it for? How does it work? If how it really works is people sort of buying tables and bringing their friends along, then do we need to replicate that with like a people-driven, fundraising strategy? Do we, how do we replicate it? I think when you think about all the time that goes into planning an event, how late are you going to be at the office every day in the week leading up to that event? If it's your big thing for the year, we might have to spend that much time still, but just on more individualized donor outreach. And the thing I keep wondering, this is just a question. It's not a best practice, but I keep wondering as events get shaken up, how many of these events are going to end up being rethought or re-strategized or reconsidered for next year? And should we be surveying people to say, hey, should we do this event next year? Should we do it differently? Tina, I don't know how this strikes you, but I think about all the organizations we've worked with I've been with the firm for 13 years now, and I feel like we've seen so many organizations that do a ton of events, so much so that they never get around to doing enough major gift cultivation. And we see lots of organizations that have good events but never have the time to do the follow-up with each individual event attendee. So they just do the event and then it's over and it passes. And they miss the actual opportunity that events create, which is you follow up with each person, you do the stewardship, you build that into a cultivation. I don't think we've ever seen an organization that's doing way too much individual major gift cultivation and not enough events. So I'm wondering if this is like these things just have such a momentum of their own. We've done them every year. Everybody expects them. They end up just taking up so much time. I'm wondering if this creates an opportunity for some organizations to rethink that strategic balance.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Andy. I mean, it kind of goes to just in general, how much can we get done in today's world that doesn't require a face-to-face meeting, can be accomplished by an email. Of course, I think face-to-face is never going to be fully replaced. The way that I see like a printed annual report can never be fully replaced. You know, a lot of organizations are trying to move it online and they've seen some success with it, but I think that you can't get rid of that printed annual report. It's the same kind of thing. I don't think we're going to get rid of in-person meetings or in-person galas and things like that, but this time that we have here is shaking things up and making us reconsider, are there ways of doing things that we actually didn't know were possible? We're all being forced to be creative, think outside the box, roll with the punches, go with the flow. How many idioms can I come up with? Really, this is our chance to take a hard look at how we've always done business. Can we make it different? And I am just predicting that there was a group of people who are so glad not to go have their rubber chicken dinner and instead, you know, engage in a different new way. And especially if we think about younger generations, I mean, you know, my kids are both teenagers. They're like fine. They're fine with this virtual engagement, doing things through video. They're totally comfortable. And I think, you know, even like my children's grandparents are doing like Korean lessons through video. They're doing it by Zoom 3 times a week now. So even, you know, like the grandparents, they're getting on board with using Zoom. And so I think this is just going to be a shift that maybe we were always like on the cusp of making, but this has forced the issue and we can really, you know, embrace it and think of how we can improve things as a result.
Great, thank you so much. I think we have time for one last question. We've been getting actually quite a few questions about communication, formats of communication such as handwritten notes, whether this is something people are still doing due to fears of COVID. Some organizations who have primarily relied on direct mail need to launch a digital fundraising program. Do you have any thoughts about the best communication strategy as of now and what organizations can do to pivot?
Okay. I wish I had more to speak from in answering this question, just being candid. Handwritten notes, that's interesting. I haven't heard that from clients, although I understand the concern. If that's an important part of your current communication strategy, I would be a little hesitant to abandon it. If it's not, it might not be the time to introduce it. There's probably also some best practices that we should Google before we, before we do anything with that. Because I'm actually not sure what the relevant health considerations or concerns might be around that. With direct mail, I think my main concern would just be looking at anything that's already, like I said before, already scheduled to go out and already written, and making sure that we can stop the presses and adjust or adapt as needed. We are seeing organizations put off large print runs of brochures and things and stick with more, at least in campaigns, stick with more flexible materials. And you can things that you can adapt and edit more on the fly. So if you were about to do a big major donor brochure, maybe you stick with more of a editable presentation deck format for a while. But yeah, I think this is going to be very case to case. I feel like I don't have a complete organized kind of best practice response, to be quite honest. But I think it would be within the unique strategy of each organization, probably not abandoning things that you have found impact and value in, but maybe not launching new significant printing projects at the moment, if they're not, if it's for something like a campaign brochure that can be where you have some flexibility on time.
Great. Well, thank
And
you all
this is
so
Chris,
much.
if I can add, sorry.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Just really quickly, I actually had someone handwrite a note to me, scan it in, and email it to me. So they knew I wasn't in the office, and so they emailed the handwritten note. So you get both things right there.
Brilliant.
I love that.
It's sweet, you know? I love it.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, Chris has the solution.
Well,
She's Director of Communications now.
You can search.
Great. Well, thank you again to our co-host AFP Maryland and to all of you for joining us today. We also encourage you to visit our COVID-19 resource page where you can read our advice, review resources, and schedule a free consultation with us. Within 24 hours, you'll be receiving a follow-up email from GoToWebinar with a link to the recording and resource page. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to email our presenters with any questions you have. I know there are quite a few questions that we didn't get to today, so we will try and follow up with you after. And with that, we'd like to thank you all, and take care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.